Okay, so we're moving on to, I guess, the negative side of gaming in terms of common descriptions of gaming. It's very often that I hear students say this themselves, and I very often hear parents refer to the fact that their child is addicted or they're worried about their child being addicted to gaming. This is a problem because I think the term gets used figuratively and literally depending on the people that are using it. Often students will say, "Oh, I'm totally addicted to Minecraft," or whatever it is. They just mean that they could keep playing it all day if you let them. It's not the same as addiction. Um, what it really is, most likely, is what's called flow. This was a philosopher called, he's still alive, Csikszentmihalyi. He's a Czech psychologist, and he writes about flow. Google it if you'd like to know more, but it's the kind of thing which, when you hear about it, has an intrinsic truth to it. Ultimately, what he says is that we all experience this thing called flow, and it's a state where you are so engrossed in what you're doing that you lose all sense of time and space. You are in this flow state where you are completely tuned in and completely focused on an activity to the extent that it excludes everything else. I think for many parents and adults, you experience this in your work life. If your work life is challenging, enjoyable, an area in which you excel, you will probably quite often experience a flow state and time will fly by, and this is a good thing. Well, it's a good thing as long as it doesn't get out of hand. And the problem with games is they're particularly good at creating flow states. A flow state can be experienced reading a book, watching a film, a movie, but it's most likely to be experienced when you're actually actively engaged in a sport, in the act of creating, in the act of problem solving, which of course is very common in video games. So my point is, before you leap to the assumption that your child is addicted, ask yourself, are they in a state of flow? Have you been in a state of flow? It's something you can probably relate to if you think about it. If you reflect on your own experiences, when do you experience flow? When was the last time you experienced it? Well, that's probably a similar experience to your child. The problem is, if you're not a gamer, you probably haven't experienced the flow state that's created by a really great video game. I say a really great video game because there are really bad video games that are very bad at creating flow states. You see, flow states require getting the tuning right between something being just about right. Not too difficult or it's frustrating, not too easy or it's boring. So addiction is something I can't ignore because it's so commonly used, whether I like it or not, whether it's being used figuratively or literally, it's out there. So I'd like to make a point that it's not a helpful term. It's quite a negative, destructive way to describe something that your child maybe really enjoys. So to say to your child, you're addicted, is just really compounding the problem. I don't think you can expect to have a helpful, productive conversation if you are basically accusing them of addiction. They may have problems, but to call it addiction is unfair and inaccurate. Addiction is a chemical thing. Addiction to nicotine, addiction to alcohol, addiction to, I don't know, heroin, caffeine. The point is that if you have a problem with gaming, your problem is behavioral, not chemical. So at least let's try and keep on the scientifically accurate side of the conversation.
Was the first game that was compelling to the point of being addictive. While playing, you were dimly aware that some kind of irrational appeal had completely gripped your mind.
It was like a sickness, like absolutely like a sickness, because it was a constant. Can I do this? I can do it. I've won. Can I do this? I've won. I've won. I've won. I've won. I've won. Panic, panic, panic. And then eventually you would lose. But there was always success. Was always just a couple of button presses away. It was always a couple of button presses away. So it was just a constant reward.
There's a concept called flow in video game playing, and in fact it happens outside of video game play as well, and it's where a person will be completely immersed and engaged in the task at hand, and everything else just disappears and falls to the wayside.
I think it's worth pointing out that addiction, or this addictive compulsive element of games, isn't something that's confined to games like, I don't know, Call of Duty or World of Warcraft, or any other game you might care to mention or that's currently blinging up in the headlines. That guy was talking about Tetris. And Tetris and games like it, Candy Crush, are games which I think you'll find many adults struggle with in terms of their compulsion. But I wouldn't leap to say they were addicted. Now, he himself uses the term addiction. I think he's wrong. He's describing a flow state. Now, if you're starting to lose sleep because of it, you are clearly having problems. We'll get to that now. So, compulsion. Compulsion is still a problem. And there are kids who clearly struggle to manage their gaming behaviour. You could argue the same is true with adults who struggle to manage their work-life balance. They are totally focused on their work. They are compulsively, open quotes, close quotes, addicted to their work life, and they struggle to get the balance right. So I think in some ways, parents, you need to ask yourself, are you modeling compulsive behavior, or are you modeling ways to manage compulsive behavior? Because I think you could say that in the 21st century, a legitimate skill for kids to be developing through managing their gaming experiences is the ability to deal with distraction, to deal with compulsion. These are things they're going to be wrestling with all of their lives. And I think in their childhood, in their teenage years, you're around to help them to manage compulsive behavior. When they then grow up and become hopefully successful in the workplace, they will hopefully be skilled at managing compulsive behavior in their work life as well. If you feel that any of these things are true of your child, then you probably do need help. I think 14 hours is a good number to use as a guideline. More than that, in 1 week would be more than 2 hours a day, and I'd say that's pushing it. Significantly more than 14 hours a week, then you have a problem. I think it's helpful to make a comparison between screen time. So I might say to my child, you've got 2 hours of screen time today. You choose. Is that going to be TV time, or is it going to be computer time? Is it going to be console playing, playing on the Mac, playing on the iPad? It's a screen time. You choose how you want to use that for your recreation, for your playtime, but you can't have both. You can't have 2 hours of TV time and 2 hours of game time. If you're the kind of parent who's happy with your child watching TV for 3 or 4 hours, then I don't see how you can't be happy with them playing games for 3 or 4 hours. In fact, when I come home from work and see my kids lying prostrate on the couch, virtually motionless, watching a TV show, I'm more disturbed by that than I would be if they were sitting up straight, interacting with a video game, and using their brain to solve problems, experiencing what we call cognitive demand and active engagement. If your child is compulsive and you're worried they're suffering from compulsive gaming, then talk about it, don't ban it. Try other things. There are many other games other than the game they're mainly playing. Maybe they're compulsive about Minecraft or World of Warcraft or, I don't know, Civilization. You can find other games in different genres, maybe broaden their diet of gaming, broaden the palette. Go to Planet Crush, see what they're saying on there. And last but not least, in school, you could see a counsellor that may be able to give you appropriate guidance. Bear in mind, though, that counsellors are probably also going to use that word that I detest, addiction, but never mind. Hopefully we can move the conversation forward with helping your child to manage their habits more effectively. This is a news headline. Don't take my word for it. I think if you do a bit of Googling, you'll find that this debate between compulsion and addiction is a common one. This is a huge report that was published by the UK Parliament and went into some detail. I summarised the main points for you here. Addiction is not a medically valid term when it comes to gaming, and problem gaming isn't as common as the media would have you believe. The major problem, what causes compulsion, is multiplayer gaming. So many single player games are pretty much like a book. So I've been playing a game called The Last of Us. It's an amazing game. It's extremely compulsive. It's an incredibly riveting game that has a compelling narrative, and that's combined with incredibly engaging active gameplay. It's hard to put down, like a really good book and like a really good film or really good TV show. But it ends. And when the story ends, the game ends, and that's it. The problem with multiplayer is it doesn't end. It's endless. Literally, these kids could be playing forever if you let them, hour after hour, night after night, and there are kids coming and going. But if your child is compulsive, they're not even aware that they're now playing with kids that are new entrants to the game, and the kids that they were playing with for 2 hours have now gone home and gone to bed.
And one day we all went in, one Saturday, we all went in and set up the computers, set up the local area network so that we could all play Doom together. And it was my first experience of being in a game world with a whole bunch of friends, playing together, beating enemies. and being aware of each other, that whole idea of telepresence, the idea of being aware of each other in a game world, it was fascinating and it was so compelling. And we just played for 12 hours straight. The beauty of video games is that it adds a dimension to friendship that nothing else does. Going to see a film with your friends is nothing compared to being in a shoot 'em up or a game with your friends. And Doom was the first game that really allowed us to experience that.
So I got to be honest here and say I'm not much of a multiplayer gamer. My son is. So kind of my input here is pretty much from a father's perspective. I can see why it's powerful. I can see why it's enjoyable, and I can see why it is compulsive. But we've been working with him to manage this. I think again, it's not helpful to call it addiction. We are human beings. We are social creatures, and the social element of gaming is what makes it open quotes quote unquote addictive, or I would prefer to say compulsive. You could argue that as adults we are experiencing our own game form in terms of Facebook and Twitter. We don't call it a game, but increasingly they are being seen as games. Facebook is something I often see parents who are in waiting rooms, bus stops. They're quite compulsive in their checking of their status updates. And there's a score system there in terms of how many likes can you get, how many people are commenting on your posts, how many friends have you got in Facebook, how many retweets.
Twitter is a massively multiplayer online game in which you choose an interesting avatar and then role-play a persona loosely based on your own, attempting to accrue followers by repeatedly pressing lettered buttons to form interesting sentences.
The biggest way in which video games have affected our world for me is the increasing gamification of real life. Stuff like Twitter is a game. It's about, small achievements adding up to bigger ones, and it's about playing the rules of whatever you're in.
So I think before we point the fingers at the kids, maybe it's time for some adults to take a step towards examining their own gaming life. Maybe some of the things you don't think of as gaming, but are forms of recreation and are forms of play for you as an adult. Are you modelling restraint? Are you controlling your own screen time? Because this is a conversation you can have with your child. If you are, then share your strategies with your child. If you're not, at least attempt to see that your child is experiencing something which is a social compulsion, not a compulsion towards a machine. It's the people in that multi-gaming space that they're attracted to, not so much the machine itself.